Before we begin, find a comfortable place to rest. Let your breath slow and allow your mind to soften. Tonight's story is gentle, a whisper from the shadows, told not to frighten, but to soothe and guide you into peaceful sleep. If you enjoy these tales that blend mystery with calm, please consider subscribing, so you can return here whenever you need a quiet moment before drifting off. Welcome. You've arrived at a place where sound falls gently. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the day slip behind you. Tonight's tale is not to startle, but to settle. A whisper from the past, a room that never stopped waiting. Close your eyes. The story begins. Lillian had never liked old houses. There was something about their silence that made noise feel wrong, like even your footsteps were intruding on someone else's memory. Still, here she was, standing in front of her grandmother's cottage, wind in her sleeves, suitcase by her boots, wondering if this place could ever feel. She hadn't been back since childhood. The cottage sat on the edge of a village called Withering Holt, a name so delicate it sounded like something you'd find pressed in an old book. Most homes here leaned slightly, as though nodding politely to time, but her grandmother's home stood upright, proud, waiting. Lillian unlocked the front door with the brass key still strung around her neck, its chain thin with age. The door opened without resistance. She stepped into stillness. Dust shimmered in the afternoon light, like it had been waiting too. The air carried the faintest smell of lavender and fireplace ash. Nothing had changed, not the crooked rug in the hallway, not the brass coat hook shaped like a raven, not even the stack of old letters sitting on the side table. Everything had stayed. Only people left. She took a slow breath, unsure whether to speak out loud, to announce herself to a house she barely remembered. But instead, she simply walked forward. The living room was just as she recalled. Soft blue wallpaper faded like mist. A shelf of porcelain birds. The clock on the mantel had stopped at 3:12, probably decades ago. In the kitchen, she made tea the way her grandmother had taught her. One spoon of loose leaves, never from a bag, water just below a boil. She didn't even drink it, just held the cup in both hands, grounding herself in something warm. Outside, the wind nudged the trees gently. Inside, time seemed to curl around her ankles like a sleepy cat. She would stay for 2 nights. Enough time to sort through the things her mother hadn't wanted to deal with. The lawyer said the house would be listed after she left. That part didn't bother her. What did was the second floor. She hadn't gone up yet, and she remembered faintly that there was a room at the end of the hall, one she was never allowed in as a child. That room, even now, thinking of it made her skin tighten slightly, like remembering a dream you can't place. She shook it off. Just a room, just a house, just a quiet place to sleep. The night settled slowly over Withering Holt. Lillian watched the light fade from the kitchen window, where ivy curled against the glass as if trying to look in. The sky turned from pale peach to deep lavender, and finally to that quiet shade of blue that seemed to hum with silence. She hadn't turned on many lights, just one in the hallway and another by the armchair. The cottage didn't like being too bright. It felt disrespectful somehow, like trying to shout in a library. She curled into the armchair by the fire that no longer lit. The tea was cold now, but she still held it. And in that stillness, she remembered the room, the one at the top of the stairs, the one her grandmother always kept shut. She used to say, "That room's just resting, dear. Don't wake it." Lillian had never questioned that until now. She hadn't planned to go upstairs tonight. There was a fold-out cot on the ground floor, and she had thought to sleep there. But as she stood, stretching her limbs, her body turned toward the stairs almost of its own will. The steps creaked gently beneath her, like they remembered her weight. Each one felt softer than she expected, like she was walking into memory, not wood. The hallway upstairs was narrower than she remembered. Wallpaper peeled like dried petals. And at the very end, the door. That door. Its wood was darker than the others. The knob, older. There was no sound, no draft from underneath. Nothing to suggest anything at all lay behind it. But she felt it, like something in there had noticed her years ago, and now it stirred again. She touched the knob. Cool. Smooth. She didn't turn it. Not yet. Instead, she opened the door to the bedroom she remembered staying in as a child. Smaller than she'd thought, but still here. The same iron bed frame, the same quilt, faded now, the same scent of cedar and lavender. Lillian stepped in and felt, for a moment, like she had walked back into herself at 7 years old. She brushed her fingers along the bookshelf, still lined with old hardcovers. One slipped free easily, The Secret Garden. She smiled. Her grandmother had read it to her every night she stayed here. She could still hear the soft rhythm of her voice, like the turning of pages in her mind. She tucked herself into bed, quilt pulled up to her chin. The room was cool, but not cold. The kind of chill that encouraged deeper sleep. And for a while, she just lay there, listening. To wind. To nothing. To the way silence sometimes seems to breathe. That's when she heard it. A soft sound. Not loud, but there. Like fabric being moved, or breath through an open mouth. It didn't frighten her. It felt familiar somehow, like an old house shifting in its sleep. She sat up. The sound had come from the end of the hall, from the room that waited. She listened again. Nothing. Just the wind nudging ivy against the glass. She smiled at herself. Of course, old houses made sounds. That's what they did. Still, she whispered almost without realizing it. I'm just staying the night. You don't have to worry. And with that, she lay back down and slept. That night, the dreams came quietly. Lillian didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she was watching the shadows shift gently across the ceiling. The next, she was somewhere else. Not far, somewhere that felt parallel. In the dream, she was in the same house, but younger. She was wearing her childhood slippers, the ones with the worn-out soles. And the house was brighter, more alive. The wallpaper fresh, the furniture polished. There were voices in the other room, soft, indistinct, like family gathered just out of sight. She wandered the hallway slowly, her dream body light and quiet. The door at the end wasn't closed in the dream. It was open, wide. Inside, there was a room filled with music. Not loud, not joyful, but gentle, distant, like a music box playing underwater. On the far wall, a large mirror. Or perhaps it was a window. She couldn't tell, because her reflection wasn't hers. It was a girl about her age, but dressed in older clothes. Lace collar, ribbons in her hair. The girl smiled, and then mouthed something. Lillian leaned closer, trying to hear, but her dream self began to drift backward like sleep, pulling her deeper into its layers. The room blurred. The girl faded, and Lillian woke. Morning came slowly, as if the house hesitated to let go of the night. Light filtered through the curtains like it had traveled a long way. The air smelled of wood and something floral, but not fresh. Pressed flowers, dried lavender, like a memory of scent. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, unsure whether the dream had been comforting or unsettling. Both, maybe. She walked down the hallway barefoot, letting her hand drift along the wallpaper. It was warm to the touch, almost like skin. When she passed the door at the end, she paused, just for a moment. It was still closed, but something about it felt different, not threatening, just aware. Downstairs, she made tea again. Same leaves, same cup, same steam curling upward like spirit smoke. The letters on the side table caught her eye. She'd seen them before, but hadn't opened any. She picked one up now. No stamp, no address, just her grandmother's name in ink that had begun to fade. Inside was a short note. She comes to the mirror more often now. I think she's trying to remember something. Or someone. There was no signature. She checked the next letter. Similar handwriting. If the rune ever opens itself, let it. But speak gently. It only responds to kindness. She felt a small pulse in her chest. Not fear. A kind of recognition. The room. The dream. The girl in the mirror. None of this felt new. It felt old, like she was walking back into a story she had once been part of, long before she knew how to read it. Outside, the wind had stilled. Leaves hung in the trees like held breath. She stood by the hallway staircase again, looking up. This time she didn't hesitate. Each step felt lighter than the one before. At the top, the same quiet, the same door. But now, something was different. The air was warmer. The faintest scent of rosewater lingered her grandmother's perfume. She reached out and turned the handle. And this time it moved. The door opened with a slow, deliberate sound. Not a creak, but something like a sigh. And beyond it was the room. The room breathed around her. Not literally, but it felt that way, like air moved in soft circles, carrying the weight of 1,000 exhaled memories. It wasn't cold. It wasn't dark. It was still. The wallpaper was faded rose, lined with a vine pattern that curled like old thoughts. Dust floated like stardust in slanted beams of morning light. There were no cobwebs, no signs of disuse, only time. In the center of the room stood a small writing desk. Its surface was worn smooth with hues like someone had once sat there, often in quiet. Beside it, a high-backed chair with a crocheted shawl still resting across its top. Lillian stepped forward slowly. On the desk lay a single item, a hand mirror, oval, silver frame, etched with small symbols, stars, a crescent moon, and something that looked like an eye. She reached for it, then paused. The mirror wasn't dusty. It had been cleaned. Recently. She lifted it gently. Its weight was delicate, familiar. In its reflection, she saw the room, the desk, the chair, the doorway behind her, and a figure, just for a moment, not behind her, in the mirror. A young girl, the same one from her dream, wearing the same lace-collared dress, standing in the corner with a solemn expression. Lillian turned. Nothing there. She brought the mirror back up, empty. The room was still again. Only now it felt as if someone was listening. She sat in the high-backed chair. It gave the slightest groan beneath her weight, but not in protest. More like it remembered her. There were notebooks in the drawer. She opened the top one. Faded ink. Slanted handwriting. A child's at first, then gradually growing more practiced. It was a journal. Today I waited again. She said she'd come read to me, but forgot. The wind was loud. I stayed in the room like she asked. Maybe tomorrow. I saw someone in the mirror. I think she's me, but older. She looked at me kindly. That made me less lonely. If I fall asleep in here, I dream the same thing. A garden with no gate. Only walls and music. I can't find the door. Each entry was quiet, longing, unfinished. Each one ended the same. I'll wait. Lillian felt something soften inside her. Not sorrow. Not pity. Recognition. She remembered sitting outside this door as a child, hearing soft hums from within. Her grandmother would hush her. Let her rest, love. She's not ready to be remembered yet. At the time, she thought it meant someone had died. But maybe it meant something else. Maybe remembering is what wakes them. The light in the room shifted. Not brighter, not darker, just deeper, as if the sun paused to listen. She picked up the mirror again, held it carefully. "Who are you?" she whispered. In the surface, the silver shimmered, and for a breath, it wasn't just a reflection. It was a window. The room behind her changed in the glass, same shape, but younger, filled with toys, curtains drawn back, sun pouring in, and a girl at the desk writing. She paused, looked directly at Lillian. Her mouth didn't move, but the words came anyway. "You remembered. That's enough." Lillian's eyes stung, but she wasn't afraid. The image faded. Only her own reflection remained, now soft and tired, and still holding the mirror like it mattered. She whispered, "You're not forgotten." And the room sighed again, not from walls or wood, from something older, something grateful. That night, Lillian didn't dream. She slept deeply, and when she woke, the air in the house had changed. The heaviness was gone, as if something had finally exhaled after a long time holding its breath. The days that followed were quieter. The house no longer creaked with hesitation. The hallway no longer breathed that subtle tension. Even the wind outside seemed to tread more gently across the old wooden eaves. Lillian found herself spending more time in the room, not to chase ghosts, but to sit, sometimes in silence, sometimes humming the lullabies her grandmother once sang. Other times she wrote, not in her own notebooks, but in the little girl's journal. She'd found a clean page tucked near the back. The ink still flowed somehow, as if the room allowed it. I remember now. You weren't forgotten. You were waiting for someone who could hear without fear. She left the book open on the desk, and when she returned the next day, the entry had been underlined softly, carefully, in a shade of ink that wasn't hers. One evening, just before dusk, she dreamt again. But this time, it wasn't the house she entered. It was the garden, the one the girl had written about. Walls high with ivy, no gate, only music drifting from unseen corners. She walked barefoot across dew-kissed grass. The air shimmered. Every petal, every leaf seemed to hum with memory. In the center stood the mirror. No frame, no glass, just an oval of still air, rippling slightly like water. And across it, the girl, but older now. Not a child, a young woman. The same eyes. She looked at Lillian with warmth and relief. Not like someone seeing a stranger, but like someone being remembered fully, finally. I was never trapped, she said, just unheld. Her voice was soft, like linen folding. I didn't need release. I needed someone to sit with me while I stayed. You did that. She held out her hand. Lillian didn't reach for it. She didn't have to. The gesture alone was enough. A promise kept. And then the woman smiled. A smile that belonged not only to the ghost, but to the room, to the mirror, to every story that waits to be heard. And she turned and walked into the garden beyond. Lillian woke with her hand resting on the mirror. The house was still, the room warm. The journal's final page held one last line, new, fresh. Thank you for remembering me with peace instead of fear. That morning, Lillian brewed tea with the same leaves, but the flavor was different, lighter, as though some unseen weight had lifted from the air, from the kettle, even from the water itself. She wrote a letter. No stamp, no address, just ink and honesty. She placed it inside the journal, closed it gently, and left the room door slightly ajar, letting the light spill through. As the season shifted, Lillian stayed in the house longer than she'd planned. She began recording the dreams, not just hers, but dreams she imagined others might have when a story half-remembered finds its voice again. Stories of quiet hauntings, not of horror, but of held breath finally released. She called them tales for the soul, and they began with silence, and they ended with peace. Weeks passed. The room at the end of the hall remained open. Not wide, just enough. Enough for light to move through it, for silence to drift in and out like breath. Lillian didn't close it. Somehow she felt that to shut the door would be to forget, and forgetting was never the point. She no longer checked the mirror for reflections. She didn't wait for apparitions. She simply lived. Some mornings she'd sit at the writing desk and listen, not for voices, but for presence, like the room itself was breathing with her, keeping her company. One day, while sorting through a stack of old books in the downstairs cabinet, she found something tucked behind the wood. A photograph, sepia-toned, faded. 3 figures, 2 adults, 1 child. The child wore a ribbon in her hair, faint but unmistakable. The back of the photo simply read, "Anna, always waiting for spring." Lillian held it for a long time, not with shock, but with reverence. as though she had found the last page of a book she had been living inside. She placed the photo in the journal upstairs, pressing it gently between two entries. A soft thank you. That night she dreamed again, but not of the girl, not even of the mirror. She dreamed of the house, empty, peaceful, not abandoned, just resting. Sunlight streamed through every window. Curtains swayed in rhythm with some distant lullaby. No doors were closed. Every room held its own story, but none of them begged to be heard. They simply existed, like petals on a pond, like songs already sung. And in the dream, Lillian didn't walk as a visitor. She belonged. When she awoke, the world felt quieter, or maybe she had become quieter within it. She made tea, wrote in her notebook, then stepped outside to walk among the trees that bordered the garden. A breeze touched her hair, not cold, not warm, just present. Later, she found herself in the town library, wandering, not looking. And yet something found her. A small cloth-bound book, tucked between volumes on folk traditions. It had no title on the spine. She opened it. The first page read, "Tales That Waited." Inside, short stories, parables, fragments of dreams. One was titled, "The Girl in the Mirror Who Waited to Be Known." No author listed. No publisher, just there, waiting. She smiled softly, closed the book, and in that moment she understood the story hadn't ended. It had joined the river, the gentle stream of stories whispered between dreams, between waking and sleeping, between forgetting and remembering. Not all ghosts are lost. Some just need someone to sit with them, long enough to let the silence speak. Now, each night before sleep, Lillian writes one line. Just one. What waits in stillness will someday bloom. And she leaves the notebook by the mirror. Sometimes it stays as it was. Sometimes in the morning, a second line appears beneath it, written in softer handwriting. If you're still here, somewhere between waking and sleep, remember, not every haunting is meant to frighten. Some just ask to be heard. Some wait not to scare us, but to love us. Through time. Close your eyes gently now. Let the echoes soften and drift into the quiet where stories rest. It began with a scent. Soft, floral, familiar, like the pressed petals in a diary long forgotten. Lillian sat upright in bed, the aroma lingering in the stillness of dawn. Not strong enough to name, but tender enough to remember. She hadn't opened any windows, and yet the scent seemed to come from within the house, like breath through old walls. She stood barefoot and wandered quietly down the hallway. The room at the end remained ajar, but this time she did not step inside. Instead, she turned to the attic. She rarely visited the attic. The pull to climb those narrow steps came not from curiosity, but from something quieter, like the echo of a name she'd almost remembered. Upstairs, dust painted everything in soft gray. She traced her fingers along a covered trunk, lifted its creaking lid. Inside, time waited politely, wrapped in linen, bound in silence. At the bottom of the trunk, beneath old holiday cards and yellowed photos, was a child's drawing, crayon on brittle paper. A house with 4 windows, a door drawn in blue. But it wasn't just any house. It was this house. Same chimney, same crooked tree by the porch, Same round attic window. At the bottom, in large, uneven letters, "Home where the light comes back." It was her handwriting, but she didn't remember drawing it. She turned it over. On the back was another message, written not by a child, but an adult, her mother, in that soft cursive she hadn't seen in decades. "When you find this, it means the house is awake. Be gentle. It remembers." Lillian sat down slowly. Something deep within her began to stir. Not fear, not wonder, but recognition. That night, the dream came like mist through a keyhole. She was standing in a hallway, but not the one she knew. This was her childhood home, but younger, untouched by time. The walls were freshly painted. The carpet smelled of warmth. And yet, somehow, she knew the door at the end of the hallway led to the mirror room. In the dream she approached. The handle was porcelain, cool beneath her fingertips. Inside she saw herself, but not as she was now, as a child, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing. The mirror beside her. Child Lillian looked up, smiled softly, then spoke without moving her lips. "We left pieces of ourselves here." She held up a string of paper dolls. They had no faces, only mirrors for heads. Everyone who visits leaves a bit of their sleep behind. The dolls fluttered once and vanished. Lillian tried to speak, but her voice stayed in her chest like an unopened letter. And then the child was gone, the room empty, except for the mirror, which now reflected both her past and present self, standing side by side, hands not quite touching. She awoke with tears drying silently on her cheeks. And when she walked past the mirror that morning, she saw not her own reflection, but a paper doll, taped gently to the corner of the frame. The next few days became a soft unraveling. Lillian began to remember things she hadn't thought of in years. A nightlight in the shape of the moon. Her mother humming while folding linens. A game she'd played alone, find the secret door. It had always been pretend, until now. She wandered the house like a returning pilgrim, and everywhere she looked, she began to notice tiny marks, like footprints in the fabric of the place, scratches behind a doorknob where she used to hang her backpack, faded height marks behind the kitchen pantry, a loose floorboard that always squeaked, still loyal to its secret. The house didn't just remember, it cared. She opened the mirror room fully now, kept it lit with a candle in the evening. Sometimes she would read aloud, not to banish anything, but to invite presence. Old books, poetry, fairy tales, and sometimes she felt the air thicken slightly, as if someone else was listening. She no longer feared it. Whatever it was, it had waited too kindly. Then one evening a sound, a gentle rustling from the attic. Not a bang, not a scrape, just a shift, like something long asleep had exhaled. She climbed the stairs, found the trunk again, and on top of it, a letter, old paper, folded with care, not sealed. Inside, a message in soft blue ink. "I've been watching the mirror with you. Thank you for remembering me. Not every house has someone to listen." It was signed E. She didn't need to ask who it was. That night, she placed the letter beside the crayon drawing, together like old friends, or pieces of a song returning home. She lit a candle by the mirror and whispered, "I remember." The flame danced gently, casting twin shadows, one for her and one for someone she'd never met. But oh, and when she turned to leave the room, she didn't close the door. She left it just wide enough for a memory to pass through. The mirror had begun writing back, not in words spoken aloud, but in ink that appeared only by candlelight. Each evening, Lillian would leave a letter taped to the corner of the frame, simple pages of her thoughts, memories, questions she didn't ask aloud. And in the morning, there would be a reply. Same page, different handwriting. The words shimmered faintly like dew on glass. Never harsh, always intimate. The first message had been short. "You see kindly." That is rare. It was signed simply, E. She didn't know if it meant Evelyn, but somehow she felt the signature settle in her chest like recognition. Each night a new exchange. She wrote, "What is it like being on the other side?" And the reply came, "It's not the other side. It's just the other room. One breath away. We share more walls than you think." Another evening, Lillian asked, "Are you lonely?" The mirror answered, "Not since you spoke." There was no urgency to the letters. No haunting. No moaning from behind the glass. Only communion. As though the mirror was not a barrier, but a page that turned differently. She began to look forward to the correspondence. It gave her days a rhythm. Wake, tea, walk, write. She began telling E about her childhood, her dreams, the feeling she sometimes had that stories waited for her in corners she forgot to dust. He always responded with poetry, gentle, almost ancient phrasing. Memory is a room we keep re-entering. We just changed the name on the door. One morning, Lillian found an envelope resting against the mirror base. Not a modern envelope. This was thick, textured paper, folded with the care of another era. Inside, a letter, handwritten in blue fountain ink. "When I was alive, I wrote letters to no one. Not because I didn't want replies, but because I didn't believe I could be heard. Thank you for proving me wrong. This house held me when I was afraid to disappear. And now, you've made it breathe again. You are not alone, even when you feel most silent. The rooms remember you." Again, E. That evening, Lillian lit 2 candles. One by the mirror, one by the window. She whispered, "Tell me about yourself." In her dream that night, Evelyn came, not as a ghost, not as an image, but as a presence, like a mother's voice from the next room, like the echo of a lullaby. The dream took her to a library. Warm, light, rows of shelves, dust caught in golden beams. Evelyn sat by a wooden desk, quill in hand. She looked young but weary, like someone who had waited through too many seasons of silence. She didn't speak, but held out a small leather notebook. Inside, entries, dates, feelings, questions. They read like letters to the world, each signed Evelyn G. One entry stood out. "If no one hears you, do you still exist?" Another. "I think houses are just books we forgot how to read." When Lillian awoke, her own journal was open on the desk, to a blank page, but on it, in the same handwriting as before, "You heard me. That makes me real again." She traced the letters with her fingertip. No smudging. The ink had dried, but the message remained alive. In the days that followed, the mirror began to reflect things not always present. Not shadows, not ghosts, but memories, sometimes a flicker of a red scarf, which Lillian had lost as a child. Other times a sound like Evelyn's quill scratching quietly in the silence. She began to understand. This mirror wasn't just showing reflections. It was showing memory, shared memory, woven between them. Lillian wrote one night, "Why me?" The reply came quickly, the next dawn. "Because you listened without needing proof." Then, one morning, the letters stopped. 3 days. No reply. Lillian waited, uncertain. Had she said something wrong? Had she opened too wide a door? She placed her final note on the frame. "Evelyn, I hope you found what you waited for." She left the room gently. That night, no dream came. Only deep, undisturbed sleep, the kind she hadn't known in years. And when she woke, there was a single line written on the mirror itself. Not paper, not ink, etched lightly, delicately like breath on glass. "Thank you for letting me go." She never saw Evelyn again, but sometimes she heard a turning page, a candle flickering with no breeze, and always the feeling that the house was no longer full of waiting, but peace. The mirror stayed, quiet, clean, still. And Lillian? She kept writing letters, to no one, to everyone, to memory, to the rooms that remember. It began with the scent of lavender, not from candles, not from flowers, but from the mirror. Lillian was brushing her hair one evening when it reached her, soft, herbal, ancient. She turned, and the mirror was no longer just reflecting her room. It showed a garden, walled in vines, lit by moonlight. Still, she blinked. The image remained. Not a flicker, not a trick of the eye. The mirror had become a window, and within it a stone path stretched forward, lined with wild roses and lavender. Beneath a sky the color of forgotten ink. Then she heard it, a bell, far away, muffled, calling. She stepped closer. With one hand, she reached out, not to touch, but to lean. The surface shimmered, not like glass, but like water catching the first breeze of night. And then she was through. The air was cool, weightless. She was standing barefoot on the stone path, surrounded by night-blooming jasmine, the petals glowing faintly like stars scattered among branches. She wasn't dreaming. She was remembering. The garden felt old, and yet new, timeless. Every flower, every bend in the path felt known. She walked slowly, like returning. Ahead stood a figure in white, not facing her, not moving, just waiting. As she approached, the figure turned. It was Evelyn, younger, smiling, but behind her eyes was the wisdom of lifetimes. "I wanted you to see," she said softly, her voice like rustling paper and falling leaves. "This is where I waited, even before I found the mirror, even before I knew I was missing." Lillian nodded. The garden rustled around them, not with wind, but with stories. Evelyn guided her to a stone bench beneath a weeping willow. There, laid out across a moss-covered table, were hundreds of letters, all handwritten, all addressed the same, to the one who will remember. Evelyn smiled gently. I wrote them over the years, not knowing if they'd ever reach anyone, not even knowing who I was writing to. She looked toward Lillian. But you heard them. They sat in silence for a long while. Words weren't necessary. The garden told the rest. Every petal that fell, a memory released. Every vine that climbed, a connection restored. Eventually, Evelyn stood. It's time, she said. Not for me, but for you. Lillian's brow furrowed. Time for what? Evelyn reached out, gently placing a hand over Lillian's heart. For you to become the mirror. She didn't mean it literally. It was something more, like passing a flame, a lineage of listening, a vow made not in words, but in stillness. Evelyn stepped back, smiling, and then she dissolved into light, like the last page of a story turning itself, not ending, just becoming something else. Lillian awoke, back in her room, back in her bed, but the mirror had changed. Its frame now bloomed with carvings, vines, petals, stars. At the base inscribed in elegant, sloping letters, to the one who will remember. She wept, but not from sorrow, from a fullness that didn't need explanation. From that day on, Lillian changed. She spoke gently to strangers. She left letters in forgotten corners of libraries. She planted lavender by the window. And every night she sat by the mirror, not to see herself, but to listen, to whoever needed to speak next. Some nights, the mirror shimmered again, and new gardens bloomed, each with their own Evelyn, their own stories, their own longing to be heard. And always Lillian was there, listening, holding space, being the room that remembered. If this story whispered softly to your soul, please share it with someone who might also find comfort here. Remember, these tales exist to accompany your rest, never to disturb your peace. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories designed to soothe, and thank you for listening tonight. Sleep well, and may your dreams be gentle.